Tonight's theme is something that I'm really kind of excited about. It's something that we talk about at HDS in a couple of our classes, this notion of faith in Buddhism. What does that mean? What does that look like? And it's a really compelling kind of theme, I think. It has sort of many layers to it, as I think does faith in any tradition. But we're going to get kind of a chance here to do a cross section a bit of, sort of how do Buddhists from various backgrounds actually look at this theme that we call faith. This is the first of what are called the five faculties in Buddhism, or I like to think of them more as the five capacities. And I'll explain all of the kind of the nomenclature in a little bit as people are still sort of joining us. Anyway, it's an interesting theme and one that I hope you'll find interesting as well. There is this term in the Pali and the Sanskrit, in the canon, in the Pali canon, Indriya. Indriya. Has anyone heard this term? Indriya. Indriya is often translated as faculties. We're not talking various departments in higher education campuses, but rather these sort of sensory-based, what I think of as capacities. And I like to sort of translate Indriya more as capacities rather than faculties. But faculties works fine. I think the reason that I prefer the term capacities is because capacities kind of relates to a fullness, yeah? It relates to kind of a particular volume or fullness that leads to progress as we cultivate these five different indriya. Now, faculties works too. These are seen to be powers or strengths. Actually, they are not the five powers, but they are the same. So there are five indriyas or capacities here, or faculties, and then five powers, and they are the same. And the idea here is that indriya, as opposed to bala, bala is a Sanskrit word for strengths or abilities. Here, indriya really is more so about sort of the efforts, the kind of mental roots, if you will, that we intentionally cultivate so that things like faith, which is the first, it is the first indriya and the first power, mental power, that those roots can begin to flourish and we really get to sort of really perceive a sense of progress on the overall path of our, whether it's meditation or spiritual path or Dharma path. And so here we're really talking about an ability to develop, which is more what Indriya refers to, and then an ability, almost a strength that we have cultivated, which is more the bala. So there are five Indriyas, five faculties, and then there are five bala or five strengths, five powers, what are often translated as powers. So not to worry too much, well, when is it a faculty, when is it a power? Basically, we're always sort of cultivating in succession these capacities and these abilities and these strengths in our practice. And interestingly, the Buddha was very clear with these five indriya that they must be well balanced. So it's not as if, hey, I'm really good at faith, but when it comes to energy or it comes to wisdom, yeah, not so good there, because they all rely on each other. They are all sort of mutually supportive in many ways. And so the Buddha was clear with, these five faculties. We always kind of want to discern, where am I? What really needs support? and what needs cultivation. Because it is only when they're balanced that we actually gain a much larger capacity on the path, on the way to our awakening, to arhatship, or to the bodhisattva's sort of fruition, if you will. So what are these 5 qualities? And the first one is something we're looking at tonight, and that is the word called shraddha, which means, loosely translated, means faith. It's often translated as faith. It can also be seen to be confidence, what some scholars would call sort of trusting confidence. Some use the word belief, but I'm not so hot on that, because belief sort of has more kind of a cognitive, almost blind faith kind of quality to it. And we're not talking really, the Buddha was very clear about shraddha, that we're not talking about just take my word for it blindly. Yeah. These faculties also have sensory, sort of corresponding sensory experiences. And so the sensory experiences actually can be forms of wisdom, because they're indicating to us, how am I doing here with this particular quality? So faith is the first one. The second one is called energy, or vigilance, which we'll look at more next week, or virya. Virya is the Sanskrit or the Pali term. It's the same in both. The third one is mindfulness, sati or smrti in the Sanskrit. The fourth is called samadhi, which some people translate as stillness or concentration. And really, those are dimensions of concentration. They're dimensions of what we're cultivating. But really, we're talking about a collectedness of mind. We're talking about a gathering together here in this term, this fourth one. So when we get to that point, that'll be in about 4 weeks, we can really dive into that. So hopefully you have enough patience, which is one of the paramitas, one of the perfections, to wait. If you're like, oh, I want to do that one tonight. Yes, we have to wait. The fifth one is wisdom, or prajna, or panya in the Pali. All of these, so all 5 of these indriya, these faculties, have corresponding powers, if you will, that suddenly become more manifest when we cultivate these in a balanced way, and we begin to see progress on the path. Now, what do we mean by faith? And that's the interesting kind of question for tonight. So one last thing here about Indriya that's very cool is there are 3 qualities that each of these that we kind of want to assess to make sure that the balance is a wholesome one. And the first one is that they're stable. Yeah. That there is a consistency to them. That they're not sort of fluctuating and wildly all over the place, even though that's natural for us. Yeah. Until we gain the strength and the power. And even then, there may be times where we don't feel so much this sense of faith or energy or mindfulness, of course. But really, the consistency, this is where the practice helps us to cultivate a sense of stability. So that's the first one, is stability. The second one is that they are tunable. And this is actually from, what text is this from? The parable of the lute is the Buddha's teaching on the Indriya, where he teaches his disciples that each one of these Indriya must be tuned like the string of a lute. Yeah, so maybe some of you have heard this parable. Not too tight, not too loose. If it's too tight, it's not going to resonate with the others. And if it's too loose, it's going to drag down the others. And so each of these This is sort of a quality of easeful effort, or effortless effort, if you will, that we need to be disciplined, but we also need to be fluid. We need to be fluid enough with these that we don't get too rigid. It's in the Anguttara Nikaya, of course, this great sort of large text in the Pali Canon. Each one should be tuned just right. And then we get the pleasing sort of sound, the pleasing music of the fruits of the path. So I, as a musician, I really resonate with that one. I know Jim does too. So Shradha, faith, number one. The reason that we did the practice that we just did was because there are various doorways into this quality that is called faith or shraddha. And my feeling from a Mahayana Buddhist point of view, from the point of view of the Bodhisattva cultivations, we gain an extraordinary sense of what we call trust and confidence by cultivating connection with others on the path. So we can call this community, but it really is one that connection brings, whether it's in Sangha or a practice group like we have here, where we can begin to feel the shift within the heart to sort of relying on these teachings, these practices in our community in a deeper way. This is one form of faith because it is helpful for a sense of confidence. So that, for example, as we just did, we were sort of contemplating the jeweled net, that each of us are sort of jewels along sort of at points of this net, or Brahma's net. And we reflect the Buddha nature in each other. Yeah. And so if you come tonight and you're not feeling it and you're downhearted or there's something really troubling you, that you're being held in this. And that too it builds a sense of confidence, that too builds a sense of trust, that there is more here than just the suffering. So the fifth hindrance of the Nibbaranas, the five hindrances in the mindfulness teachings, is doubt. And that arises in the presence of the first four: attachment, craving, clinging, and so on. Aversion or ill will or negativity is the second one. Agitation, restlessness of the monkey mind, the sleepy, drowsy laxity that comes with the sloth and torpor of the fourth. And then the fifth is doubt. And doubt is seen to be probably the worst of these hindrances. And it arises because of these first four things, whether it's our practice or we are caregivers in our work and so on. And so this quality of Shraddha, the reason this becomes a power is because the sense of trust and confidence in the teachings, in the Buddha's own sort of in the Buddha's own awakening, that he was and is sort of an awakened figure, and the teachings are valid not because he tells us they're valid, but because we realize them to be valid for ourselves. And this is where this notion of faith, it's not we just take it on quote unquote faith. It's not what we would call blind faith, that whatever is in the texts and whatever we're taught by our teachers must be true. But no, the Buddha was very clear. You need to realize these things for yourself. You need to realize these things for yourself. In fact, in the Samyutta Nikaya, the Buddha there's a story where he tells Vakali, who is just constantly hanging on every one of the Buddha's words, you need to stop having such an uncritical faith in me and begin practicing for yourself so that you realize that these teachings are true. Yeah. And so he was very concerned that people now just take everything at face value. And what good is that for a person's own capacity for awakening? Yeah. Now, it's a little bit different perhaps when we start talking about devotion, which we find uh, in abundance in Buddhist traditions. Devotion to one's teacher, to the Buddha himself, to Amitabha Buddha, to whomever, to whatever principle we sort of give our spiritual hearts over to. And I'll talk about that. I'll revisit that in a moment. So there are basically, I think, four areas that we can call faith here in this context that we're talking about. So one, trust and confidence in the Buddha and the Buddha's teachings. And by putting them to the test, the realizations that we receive when and if we realize these things to be also true for us. And part of this involves the cultivation of our own discernment, that we're gaining a confidence not just because he said so, but because we've been on the path and we are having realizations of the truth of the teachings for ourselves. And so this sort of hangs a little bit more in the camp of confidence and trust. Refuge in the three jewels, refuge in Buddha Dharmas and the community, Sangha, comes with that sense of trust. It comes with a sense of reliance on these. And so that reliance is really at the heart of faith as well, what we call faith. And second, that faith is not just rooted in a belief or in intellectual understanding of the teachings, but really it is a quality of heart. It is a quality of what we might call bodhicitta. That there is a devotional quality to showing up with the presence of a loving heart. This is why this practice we did earlier, ideally, is also deepening for our faith. And that we directly experience the presence of love both within ourselves and in each other, and that we make that available to others. This is something that deepens faith, not just receiving love from others, but knowing that we have this capacity to extend it to ourselves and to other beings. And even if we're not feeling it, this is where perhaps the trust and the confidence comes in, is, as the Buddha tells us in the mindfulness teachings, if you're not feeling a sense of equanimity, fine. Notice when it is present. Notice when it is not present. Know that it can be cultivated by development, and know the means to cultivate it through development. So he's not saying stop having no equanimity and start having it. He's saying just know that you can cultivate it. Trust in the Tathagata. Trust in the essence of clear awareness that is the underlying nature of your own mind. In essence, that you have at the center Buddha nature already. In the way that Ashvagosha tells us, original enlightenment is simply there. It's not the same as the process of actualizing it, because the process of actualizing it is just that. It is a process, not a source. And so faith here, the third piece here is faith in what we call the Tathagata Garbha, or the seed of your own awakening that is already there, the seed of your becoming, your own Buddha nature. This can be a hard one. After all, as the Dalai Lama once commented in coming and teaching compassion to his students in the West, he said it was remarkable the extent to which he encountered people with so much self-loathing, lack of self-worth, self-hatred, self-deprecation, and all of that. That makes it very, very hard to find these qualities, to believe that we are the source of these qualities. So, in many ways, realizing our own Buddha nature can be quite a challenge because there's so much in the way that we bring into it in the first place. And yet, this, what is called an inner capacity for awakening, that is already at the heart of your essence, your mind, the seed of becoming, your own Buddha nature. When the causes and the conditions are right, such as practicing diligently together, whether you do it every day or just once a week when we gather here, that your intention is really one of revealing something that you trust is there. And that's why in our meditation during the instruction, it was like, even one drop, no matter how small, is important. Because within that small drop, there is a world of faith possible. Yeah. So if you meditate regularly and you sit for 20 minutes and your mind is just giving you so much grief and hyper analyzing everything, you're just not getting a break from the mind. And the next thing you know, you're falling asleep. So the monkey mind is now riding on top of the elephant that is stuck in a rut. You know, this is the two ends, the laxity and the restlessness. Don't worry, because even if you have one moment where you drop in for a moment where the mind isn't hijacking the narrative of your meditation, just know that, like a hologram, the entirety is contained in that one moment. Yeah. It's all present to you in that moment. And be patient. Let that inspire you with confidence. In the Mahayana, back to the Mahayana teachings, Shradha really is focused on devotion. There are various schools here where the heart of our aspiration deepens the more we cultivate through things like offerings, service, bowing, ritual, essentially, ritual practices that help to sort of reconnect the heart. Prayer, meditation, chanting, embodying a practice in some way. Even if we don't meditate, even if our wisdom isn't arising from insights from deep meditative states, that's okay. Because faith is there at the heart of our reliance and trust in, let's say, Amitabha Buddha. And as a couple of you here on the call, especially one of you here on the call, has said often about the Pure Land, the vehicle of Pure Land Buddhism, it is the hardest to believe. And I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it is the easiest to practice and yet the hardest to believe. Am I getting that right? Okay, thanks. That kind of faith is really no different than everything else we're talking about. We're talking about faith in the Buddha field, faith in the luminosity and the beings, if you will, the deities that represent our own qualities to be awake. The great Buddhas, Bodhisattvas throughout history, through the past. We're trusting in their own aspirations for us, as well as the masters, the lineages, the traditions that have come before us. So in a moment, I'm going to check in with you all and see what is alive for you in this conversation. But the last one is the sort of characteristic of faith is capacity. Sharon Salzberg, any of you who have read any of her books, she actually has a book called Faith, Trusting in Your Own Deepest Experience. It's a really lovely, small book. It's very accessible. It goes very quickly. And in many ways, what she's talking about here, she divides faith up into two categories. Blind faith, which the Buddha was very clear not to fall into just taking someone's word for it. Not just sort of reading the teachings and assuming them to be true, but really putting them into practice to see if they're true for you. And what Sharon Salzberg calls bright faith. And bright faith is that which is imbued with profound clarity and discernment and wisdom. And so this is what we cultivate in shamatha practice, or calm abiding, as well as mindfulness practice, and what is called Vipassana, or insight meditation, where we begin to see into the nature of reality just as it is. What we might call suchness, what Ashvagosha in Awakening of Faith calls suchness and describes as suchness. That our capacity to abide in this way just profoundly impacts that sense of confidence in the teachings themselves. Some of you maybe have heard the story that my teacher Leslie, who was not necessarily a Buddhist teacher, truly an enlightened being, now is declined with Alzheimer's. She's in South Africa. It's still a powerful presence. And I had experiences with Leslie that sort of opened me immediately. I basically got transmissions from her in a room full of 200 people, all of us were. And we would just be sitting there meditating with our eyes closed, and she would be kind of going through the entire room and looking at each person and transmitting this sort of sense of luminous mind. And my eyes would be closed, and all of a sudden I would feel this just smack in the forehead, energetic smack, and everything opened. And I would open my eyes, and she was staring right at me. And this happened every time. It was powerful. And it's interesting that after those experiences, and I trained and I studied with her for several years. Actually, I have ever since 1997. I still consider her a great teacher of mine. But when I began to study Buddhism, and I began to look into all these many, many myriads of the Tripitaka and the Mahayana texts, and I began seeing how these forms of the teachings by the Buddha and the commentators and the ones who came later in the Kagyu and the Dzogchen lineages, one for one verifying everything that she had said and had taught us. I had even more faith in her teachings after I really studied sort of the texts. I began to study and gaining knowledge, certainly as part of my degrees, and then contemplating them and practicing meditation, practicing the texts, not just studying them in college, and going and sitting with other teachers and on and on. Well, it's amazing how the faith aspect of those experiences actually were verified by the study. The point here that I'm trying to make is that these are like mutually interdependent and influential qualities that sort of are in this larger container that we call faith. Yeah. So it's not a simplistic form of faith where, oh, I have faith in this being here. But you can start to see how confidence and trust and verifying these teachings through direct experiences and having a sense of clarity and discernment and wisdom begins to sort of widen this scope to the point where the sense of wisdom, confidence, and connection are really kind of what characterize faith in Buddhism. Now, there is another term here, and it's the last thing I'll say for now about this, called pasada. Pasada, it is a Pali term, and it basically translates to calm and joyful faith that we receive when we're inspired by those that have come before us. It's an interesting term. What it means is that we also are inspired by the teachers, by the ones in our community that are having profound experiences, by the bodhisattvas, by the Buddhas that we read about, and what we provide for others through our aspirations, through our skillful means, through cultivating this bodhisattva path, even when we're not feeling it. We share this sense of faith with others in order to help ease their suffering. We share this sense of faith, even if we're not feeling it in the moment, with others simply because they are suffering, and there is a part of us that knows more so than the ordinary mind that is suffering. Does that make sense? There is an aspect of transcendent mind, if you will, that sees the truth even when we're doubting it. This is the heart of this notion of faith, of confidence, and it offers hope to others. So whether we're in chaplaincy work or counseling, therapy, research, working in an office, whatever we're doing, how we show up can inspire faith in others. It can inspire hope and confidence, authenticity and trust. Even if we're not feeling it, we can provide that. It may not feel easy, and certainly we train in chaplaincy and in counseling. Even if we're feeling really crummy, we really show up, we put ourselves aside for the benefit of others. And when you have the quote unquote faith, that there is an aspect of you that is not suffering, no matter how you feel, that the transcendent mind or this essence of mind knows. And you know that it knows. And that's where the heart opens. You begin to feel that knowing. Sometimes it's helpful to chant. So for me, when I do my own practice, long-term practice or retreat, there are various beings. Some of you've heard my stories of Mahakala and the various deities that I incorporate into my practice. That too is faith. And this is from this really wonderful text from the 6th century that is attributed to the 6th century Indian sage Ashvagosha. This is called The Awakening of Faith. This isn't someone who's named Faith who suddenly gets up in the morning, but rather, so those of you in Saikat are laughing, who know us. We have a person named Faith in our group. Anyway, The Awakening of Faith here is a treatise basically by Ashvagosha that was translated from the Sanskrit into the Chinese somewhere in the 6th century. There actually are no Sanskrit versions of this. So what we have from the Shastras and the sort of the Chinese translations. And this particular one I have was translated by Yoshito Hakeda, who's a scholar and translator. And this is from, let's see, where is it? This passage from Awakening of Faith really sort of cuts to the heart of how Ashvagosha sort of sees faith within our practice and on our path. Now, this is one dimension of it, and we're going to then backtrack later after our practice. But here's what he writes about something that is called the aspect of enlightenment. And this section is on what he calls original enlightenment. The essence of mind is free. It is free from thoughts. The characteristic of that which is free from thoughts is analogous to the sphere of empty space that pervades everywhere. The one aspect of the world of our reality is none other than what we call the undifferentiated Dharmakaya, or the essence body of the Tathagata. This is the essence of mind, after all. And it is to be called the original enlightenment. Why? Because, in quotes, original enlightenment indicates the process, a contradiction to the process of actualizing enlightenment. The process of actualizing of enlightenment is rather the identity, one's identity with the original enlightenment. This is grounded on the original enlightenment. And because of this, the process of actualization of enlightenment can itself be spoken of. What on earth does that have to do with faith? So we're going to unpack that in a bit. Basically, what he is saying is that what he calls original enlightenment, that is the essence of wakefulness that is already there and all pervasive within this body of truth, consciousness we call Dharmakaya. And the actualization, the striving that goes into actually opening it, isn't itself enlightenment, because enlightenment is already self-evident. There is no actualizing to be done. And so how this pertains to faith, we'll be seeing in a bit. Basically, it's that the more we strive to meditate, the harder it is to meditate, yeah? The process of meditation, the process of cultivation itself, isn't necessarily the end or the sort of the actual state itself that we're cultivating, but we are learning, we are applying skillful means and methods to uncover what is already there. That is the, whether it's the realization of the great Buddha Amitabha, or it is the realization of our own essence of mind. And so how this relates to faith is simply knowing, simply trusting. Whether we feel it or not, it's okay. You know, the path can hold the reality that we cannot.